March 1970. NBC Studios. New York City. The lights above Studio 6B burned white and merciless. 11 million Americans would be watching. 11 million people settled into their living rooms with their drinks and their late-night comfort, expecting 90 minutes of laughter, music, and easy conversation. They expected Dean Martin to be charming. They expected the new kung fu guy to do a few impressive kicks. They expected Johnny Carson to hold it all together with that easy Nebraska smile. They did not expect history. But history, in the way it always does, arrived uninvited. It walked in on quiet feet, dressed in a dark blazer, calm face and composed, already aware that the room was not entirely ready for it. His name was Bruce Lee, and before that night was over, he would say 6 words that echoed across a generation: the building before the storm. Backstage at NBC was its own world, a maze of green-painted corridors, cable bundles thick as anacondas, and a particular institutional smell of carpet cleaner and hairspray that clings to television sets like a second identity. It was a world of controlled chaos, where production assistants moved with the anxious urgency of people who understood that every second cost money. Bruce Lee arrived at 6:15 p.m. He was 30 years old. He stood 5 feet 7 inches tall and weighed 135 pounds. He wore a slim-cut dark blazer over a black turtleneck, and he moved through the backstage corridor with the economic precision of a man who never wasted motion. Not one gesture was excessive. Not one step was careless. He had the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have spent years learning exactly where their body is in space at every moment. He was there to talk about a philosophy. That was the thing most people missed. They thought Bruce Lee was there to demonstrate kicks. They thought he was there to play Kato again, to be the exotic sideshow, to give the mainstream audience a few minutes of spectacle before Dean Martin came back out and restored order to the universe. The producers had booked him because Green Hornet had given him a recognizable face, and a recognizable face meant eyeballs, and eyeballs meant ratings. Bruce understood all of this. He had understood it for years. He had been navigating the machinery of American entertainment since he was 19 years old, performing martial arts demonstrations at college campuses and civic centers, watching white audiences examine it with a particular mixture of fascination and condescension that felt like being studied through glass. He knew what role he was expected to play. He had decided, quietly and without announcement, that he was done playing it. He had spent the last 18 months writing furiously pages and pages of notes on martial arts philosophy, on the connection between physical discipline and mental liberation, on the concept of water, which takes the shape of whatever contains it while remaining fundamentally itself. He had a vision for a television series that would follow a Shaolin monk to the American West, exploring spirituality and justice. He had pitched it. He had been told, gently and with regret, that an Asian lead couldn't carry an American series. He had swallowed that and kept working. Tonight, he intended to talk about water, about formlessness, about the idea that a true martial artist is not a fighter, but a philosopher who uses the body as an instrument of self-knowledge. He was prepared. What he was not prepared for was Dean Martin in a hallway with a glass of scotch. The hallway meeting. Dean Martin was, by most reasonable measurements, one of the most beloved entertainers in America. He was 52 years old, deeply tanned, impossibly relaxed, possessed a kind of effortless cool that other performers spend careers trying to manufacture and never quite managed. He had a way of looking like he wasn't trying that took decades of professional discipline to perfect. The drink in his hand was prop and personality and armor all at once. He was standing near the green room when Bruce came down the corridor, and their introduction was made by a production assistant who seemed faintly terrified of both of them for different reasons. "Mr. Martin, this is Bruce Lee." Dean Martin looked at Bruce Lee with a benign, slightly unfocused good humor of a man who had already had 2 scotches and was working on his 3rd. He extended a hand. "The Kung Fu guy," Dean said, and his smile was warm and genuine and completely uncomplicated by any awareness that something might be wrong with that description. Bruce shook the hand. His grip was measured. His smile arrived on schedule and said nothing. "Martial artist," Bruce said quietly. "Kung Fu is one system. What I practice draws from many. Dean nodded the nod of a man who has absorbed zero information, but is too charming to make that obvious. Sure. You can show us some moves out there. I prefer to discuss the philosophy, Bruce said. Dean chuckled. They're not paying us to be philosophers, kid. It was said without malice. That was the thing. There was absolutely no malice in Dean Martin's voice in that hallway. There was just a complete and unconscious certainty that he understood the landscape and that Bruce Lee did not. That certainty was so total, it didn't even register as assumption. It was just how the world looked from inside Dean Martin's particular life. Bruce said nothing. He nodded once, lightly, and moved past toward his dressing room. In the dressing room, he sat in front of the mirror for a long time. He did not look at himself with vanity or anxiety. He looked at himself the way he looked at an opponent in sparring, studying, assessing, preparing. He had been dismissed in that hallway, politely, warmly, the way you dismiss something that doesn't quite register as a full equal. He recognized the feeling the way you recognize a street you've walked 1,000 times. It was not new. It was not surprising. It was simply the landscape. He picked up the small notepad he carried everywhere and wrote 2 characters in Chinese, his mother's name. Then he set the pad down, straightened his collar, and waited. The show begins. The Tonight Show theme hit the air at 11:30 p.m. Eastern, like a starter pistol. Johnny Carson walked out to applause that was warm and automatic and deeply American, the sound of a nation greeting a trusted friend. He was 44 years old and at the absolute apex of his powers. Confident, quick, operated with the precision of a man who had done this 10,000 times and somehow managed to make it feel spontaneous every single time. He opened with his monologue. 5 minutes. Clean, professional. The jokes landing with the reliable satisfaction of a well-built machine. He made a reference to Nixon. He made a reference to the weather. He made the audience feel that they were in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. Then he brought out Dean Martin. The applause was enormous. Dean walked out with that loose-limbed, I might fall asleep but I'm too cool to bother gait that was somehow both utterly relaxed and entirely magnetic. He dropped into the guest chair with the ease of a man settling into his own sofa, drink already in hand, grinning at the audience with the open delight of someone who genuinely likes people, who has always liked people, who has been liked by people so long that the exchange has become as natural as breathing. He was funny immediately. He didn't work for it. The laughs came to him. He and Carson talked about his most recent Vegas run. He talked about Frank. He made a self-deprecating joke about his singing that made you love him more, not less. He was the exact version of Dean Martin that America wanted Dean Martin to be. Then Carson said, "We have a very interesting young man joining us tonight. You may know him from the Green Hornet. He's a martial artist, a philosopher, and he's going to talk to us a little about what martial arts really means. Ladies and gentlemen, Bruce Lee." The applause was polite, not cold, not hostile, polite. The precise temperature of an audience greeting something they don't yet know how to feel about. Bruce walked out with his measured stride. He sat down. He folded his hands in his lap. He looked at Johnny Carson with complete, unperformed calm. Dean Martin looked at him with friendly, slightly glassy interest. Carson leaned forward. "Bruce, welcome. Tell us, for people who don't know much about martial arts, what should they understand about what you do?" Bruce took a beat, not a nervous beat, a deliberate one, the beat of a man who knows that the first sentence sets everything that follows. "Most people think martial arts is about fighting," Bruce said. His accent was precise, slightly formal, shaped by Hong Kong English and American experience. "It isn't. Fighting is the least of it. Martial arts, what I practice, what I have studied since I was a child, is about understanding yourself. The body is just a tool you use to read what's inside." Carson nodded. The audience was quiet, which on late-night television meant they were actually listening, which was rarer than you'd think. "So it's philosophical," Carson said. "Everything honest is philosophical," Bruce said. Dean Martin looked between them with mild amusement. He was enjoying himself. This was interesting. The kung fu guy was smart. Dean appreciated smart. He appreciated a lot of things at this particular stage of the evening. Scotch having smoothed all the rougher edges of the world into something manageable. Carson asked Bruce to talk about the discipline involved, the years of training, the daily practice, the commitment required. Bruce talked about it with the directness of someone who has no interest in making things sound more impressive than they are. He talked about waking at 5. He talked about the hours of forms, of sparring, of repetition. He talked about the moment in every serious practitioner's career when the technique disappears and the motion becomes pure, when you stop thinking and simply are. The audience was more engaged now. You could feel it. Then Carson, reading the room and understanding that late-night television has its own gravitation requirements, leaned back and smiled and said, "So if you and Dean here had a fight, who wins?" The audience laughed. It was a good laugh, an easy one, the laugh of people being let off the hook from something slightly too serious. Dean raised his glass. I'd sing at him until he fell asleep. More laughter. Bruce smiled, and the smile was real in its way. He could appreciate a joke. He understood the function of a joke in a room like this. "I wouldn't fight Dean," he said. "A martial artist doesn't fight to hurt. He moves to understand. To fight Dean, I would need to understand Dean. And Dean seems like he would be very hard to understand sober." The audience roared. Dean pointed at Bruce with his glass. "I like this kid." For a moment, for one clear, bright moment, the whole room was exactly where it should have been. Bruce Lee and Dean Martin and Johnny Carson in a television studio, laughing together, showing the audience something warm and unexpected. Then Dean Martin had another sip of his drink, and the night changed. The moment everything shifted. It started, as these things always start, gradually. Carson had asked Bruce about his childhood, about where he learned, who taught him, what his family had thought about his dedication to martial arts. It was a human interest question, the kind that made guests seem real rather than famous, the kind that connected 11 million living rooms to a television stage. Bruce talked about his father, a Cantonese opera singer, who had introduced him to performance and discipline. He talked about learning Wing Chun from Ip Man in Hong Kong. He talked about the family apartment, about practicing in the narrow spaces between furniture, about his mother watching him from the kitchen doorway. He talked about his mother the way a man talks about something fundamental and private, not sentimentally. Precisely. She had taught him that honor was not the reputation you built with strangers. It was the standard you kept when no one was watching. Dean Martin was listening, and somewhere in his listening, something turned. It happened the way his humor always happened, loose, free associative, following a thread without necessarily knowing where it led. He had heard the word mother. He had heard strict. He had heard discipline. And somewhere in the warm blur of Scotch and studio lights and 11 million invisible viewers, he reached for a joke. "Oh, I know about Chinese mothers," Dean said, leaning forward with a confidential grin. "My buddy Leo, he dated a Chinese girl, and her mother, let me tell you, that woman would have made a drill sergeant cry." The audience laughed, nervous, unsure, watching. Carson shifted in his seat almost imperceptibly. Dean kept going, because Dean always kept going when an audience gave him even a thin strand of engagement. That was his gift and his habit. He followed laughter the way water follows gravity. "I'm just saying, Bruce, you're this incredible martial arts genius, this philosopher, this whole thing. And I bet somewhere there's a Chinese mother who's still saying, 'Why only 500 kicks? Your cousin does 600. Laughter. More this time, but still uncomfortable. The kind that makes a room feel simultaneously larger and smaller. Bruce Lee was smiling, but his eyes were not smiling. His hands, which had been loose in his lap, became still. "My mother," Bruce said, his voice measured and light, "is a very dignified woman. She taught me respect, honor, and family values." It was a correction, delivered with perfect courtesy. A door, gently but firmly closed. Dean Martin did not walk through the door. He leaned against it. Sure. Dignity, absolutely," Dean said, nodding, still grinning. "But you gotta admit, the Tiger Mom thing, there's something to it, right? I mean, look at you. You didn't get this good by accident. Somewhere behind this," he gestured at Bruce with a wave of his drink, "there's a very scary woman with a wooden spoon The audience's laughter had grown thin. A few people still clapped, mostly by reflex, the way you keep applauding a firework that's slightly off course because you're already committed to applauding and it feels worse to stop. Carson's smile had thinned to something professional and careful. He opened his mouth. Dean wasn't finished. I mean, maybe that's the secret of martial arts. Dean continued, his voice carrying the warm, fuzzy confidence of a man who genuinely believed he was being entertaining. Not philosophy, not discipline, just a mother you're more afraid of than any opponent. The laughter stopped, not faded, stopped. The audience did not make a sound. 2,000 miles of American living rooms went quiet with a particular hush of people watching something tip over the edge. And Bruce Lee in his chair went completely still. He sat the way a man sits in the moment before action, not tense, not coiled, but present. Absolutely, entirely present. Every distraction gone. Every social accommodation cleared away. The studio lights and the cameras and the 11 million viewers in Johnny Carson's careful face and Dean Martin's friendly grin. All of it fell away. What remained was simple. His mother's name, written in 2 characters on a notepad in a dressing room. What she had told him about honor. What she had told him about what truly mattered. 6 words. Bruce Lee stood up. He did it slowly, deliberately, the way he did everything. With a total absence of wasted motion, each movement containing only exactly what was needed and nothing else. He reached across to the microphone clipped to his lapel, and he unclipped it with the careful precision of a man who intends no ambiguity in anything he does. He held the microphone for a moment. He set it down on the seat of the chair. He looked at Dean Martin. Dean Martin's grin had faltered. Not fallen, faltered. The social mathematics hadn't quite completed itself yet. He still wasn't sure if this was theater. He still wasn't sure if this was part of something he'd miscalculated. Bruce Lee looked at him without anger. This was important. This was the thing that people would write about for years afterward. That there was no anger in his face. There was something quieter than anger. Something older. Something that did not require heat to be present. He said, clearly, in a voice that carried to every corner of the studio, without being raised, "My mother deserves respect." Then he turned, and he walked off the stage. He did not hurry. He did not slow. His stride was exactly what it had been when he walked out, measured, complete, belonging entirely to itself. He did not look back at Dean Martin. He did not look at the cameras. He did not perform the exit. He simply left. The studio door closed behind him. The silence lasted 4 full seconds. On television, for seconds of dead air is an eternity. It is the sound of a system failing to respond. It is the gap where the script used to be. Then Dean Martin said into the silence, his voice smaller than it had been, I was joking." Nobody laughed. Johnny Carson looked at the camera with the controlled, professional composure of a man who has hosted 10 years of live television and has learned that the only thing to do in a crisis is stay present and stay visible. His face said, I know what just happened. We'll be right back," he said. The show cut to commercial. The commercial break that lasted longer than advertised. Backstage was a storm in a very small space. The show's producer, Gene Mulholland, was on a headset talking to 3 people at once. A production assistant had been sent after Bruce Lee and returned 2 minutes later to report that Mr. Lee had collected his jacket from the dressing room, thanked the PA politely, and asked to be driven to his hotel. He was gone. Johnny Carson sat behind his desk during the break and said nothing. He had the face of a man doing interior accounting, adding up costs, estimating damage, calculating what the responsible thing was to do with the 4 minutes remaining before the camera was back on him. Dean Martin sat in the guest chair with his drink and looked at the middle distance with the expression of a man whose joke has escaped the party and caused an accident 3 blocks away. The warm confidence had left him. What remained was something more human. The recognizable, unguarded face of a man who has done something wrong and knows it and doesn't yet know what to do with that knowledge. A network executive appeared in the wings. There were whispered conversations. Decisions were made with the speed that live television demands, which is to say very fast and with incomplete information and the knowledge that in 4 minutes the cameras will be back on and whatever happened next will be the permanent public record. Carson made a decision. When the cameras came back, he was alone at the desk. Dean Martin's chair was empty. The apology heard across America. "Ladies and gentlemen," Johnny Carson said, "before we continue, I want to address something that happened during the last segment." His voice was even, serious without being theatrical. The voice of a man who understands a way to what he is doing and intends to do it correctly. Remarks were made on the stage tonight that were disrespectful and inappropriate. They targeted the family and cultural background of a guest on this show. That should not have happened. I want to apologize personally on behalf of this program to Bruce Lee and to any viewer who was offended by what they heard. He paused. Bruce Lee came here tonight to talk about philosophy, discipline, and the martial arts tradition he has devoted his life to. He deserved to be treated with the same respect we give every guest who walks through that door. He was not. We failed him. I regret that. Carson looked directly into the camera for a moment, directly into the 11 million living rooms. We'll take a short break. The studio applauded, not the automatic applause of an audience following a sign. The real kind. The kind that comes from people who just watch something honest happen in a room that doesn't usually produce honesty. The morning after, the New York Times ran it on the front page of the arts section. Bruce Lee walks off tonight's show after racial remarks. The Daily News went bigger. The headline covered the full width of the page. 6 words. Bruce Lee shuts down Dean Martin on live TV. The wire services had it by 2 in the morning. By 6 a.m. Pacific time, it had traveled to newspapers in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, Honolulu, Chicago, Miami. By 7 a.m., it had reached London, Hong Kong, Tokyo. In Hong Kong, a woman named Grace Lee Ho read the story in a newspaper that her neighbor brought to her door. She read it twice. Then she sat with it for a long time. She did not read Chinese newspapers, which were already running the story under headlines that translated roughly as "the son who would not be shamed." She read the English language version, and she read it carefully, and she found the 6 words quoted in the 3rd paragraph. "My mother deserves respect." She folded the newspaper carefully. She went to her writing desk. She took out paper and a pen. She wrote a letter to her son. The letters. Bruce Lee received mail at a rate that had become genuinely difficult to manage in the months after the Tonight Show incident. It arrived in bags, actual canvas postal bags, the kind that movie mailrooms use as props, but that Bruce's manager Raymond Chow kept very real and very sorted in a room off the main office in Hong Kong. There were letters from martial artists, letters from film producers, letters from journalists, letters from admirers. But the letters that changed the temperature of the room, the ones that Raymond Chow pulled out and set on the desk and did not put back in the bags, were the ones from ordinary people. A woman from Oakland wrote that she had come to America from Taiwan in 1951. She had raised 3 children in a country that called them foreign. She had smiled through 1,000 small humiliations in grocery stores and offices and parent-teacher conferences. She had trained herself not to react, not to show anger, because showing anger meant confirming the thing they already believed about you, that you were difficult, that you were not a full person, that your presence was conditional. "I watched you stand up," she wrote. "I watched you walk away. I am 53 years old, and I have never in my life watched someone do what you did, and I want you to know that I wept, not because I was sad, because I was not sad, because for the first time in a very long time, I was not sad." A man from San Francisco's Chinatown wrote that he had 3 sons, and he had shown them the newspaper headline, and his youngest son, 14 years old, had asked what the 6 words meant. "I told him they meant that some things are worth more than being liked." The man wrote, "I have been trying to teach my boys that for years. You taught it in a single evening." A Japanese-American man who had been interned during the Second World War wrote a letter that was 7 pages long and contained a level of pain that made the pages feel heavier than paper should. Bruce read every letter himself. He did not respond to all of them. There were thousands and time did not allow it. But he read them. He sat with them the way he sat with everything that mattered, completely, attentively, letting the weight of it be real rather than managed. The response, that wasn't response. Dean Martin's people released a statement 4 days after the incident. It was 2 paragraphs. professional in tone, measured in its admissions. It said that the remarks made during the program had been thoughtless and inappropriate. It said that Dean Martin had not intended to cause offense. It said that he had enormous respect for Mr. Lee's accomplishments and regretted any pain caused by the comments. The statement was drafted by a publicist. It had the particular fingerprint of publicist language, specific enough to seem genuine, general enough to protect the client. Whether Dean Martin himself felt remorse in a deeper sense, whether he sat at his house in Beverly Hills the days after and felt the specific, honest weight of what he'd done, was not something the statement could answer. What it answered was the immediate question, which was, would there be public reconciliation or public war? The answer, because of who Bruce Lee was neither. Bruce Lee did not respond to the statement. He did not issue a counterstatement. He did not give interviews about the incident. He did not appear on other programs to discuss it. He did not perform the rituals of public conflict or public forgiveness. He went back to work. He had a meeting with producer Fred Weintraub about a film called Enter the Dragon. He went back to his training. He wrote 40 pages of new notes on Jeet Kune Do theory. He sparred with his students. He watched his son Brandon play in the garden and thought about water, which takes the shape of whatever contains it while remaining fundamentally itself. He did not require the world to acknowledge what had happened in order for it to have happened. He knew what had happened. His mother knew what had happened. The woman from Oakland knew what had happened. That was enough. What shifted in Hollywood? The machinery of the film industry is slow in the way of large machines everywhere. Its gears are enormous and encrusted with decades of calcified assumption. And they do not turn quickly, but they do turn. Enough force in the right direction, applied consistently, eventually moves the gears. After March 1970, something moved. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a single meeting in which a studio executive stood up and said, "We have been wrong about Asian representation, and beginning immediately, everything will change." Nothing in Hollywood has ever happened that way. What happened was smaller and therefore more real. Producers who had dismissed Bruce Lee as a martial arts curiosity began to look at him differently. The walk-off had done something that 10 years of excellent performances had not quite managed. It had made him protagonist, not a performer, a protagonist, a man with a story that had stakes, a man who, when given a choice between dignity and opportunity, had chosen dignity and had suffered no apparent damage from the choice. That was interesting. That was, in the cold calculation of the entertainment industry, useful. The conversations about the Kung Fu television series were reopened. This time the conversations were different. This time, Bruce Lee was in the room as a man whose name meant something, not just martial arts, but principle, not just spectacle, but character. The negotiations would ultimately go badly. The series would be made with David Carradine, a white actor, in the lead role. The decision would be its own kind of statement, and Bruce would absorb it with the same quality of attention he brought to everything, not without feeling, but without fracture. He had a different plan. He always had a different plan. Hong Kong, Warner Brothers, a film called Enter the Dragon. But before all of that, there was a conversation with his son. The conversation in the garden. Brandon Lee was 5 years old in March 1970. He had his father's eyes and his mother Linda's openness, a combination that produced in him a quality of attentive curiosity that seemed, even at 5, like the beginning of something worth watching. Bruce brought Brandon into the garden of their house in Los Angeles on a Saturday afternoon, 3 weeks after The Tonight Show. He sat on the ground with his son the way he always did, not above him, but level with him, because Bruce Lee believed that you could not have a real conversation with someone you were looking down at. Brandon wanted to know about the television show. He had heard it discussed. He had heard his parents' quiet voices in the kitchen at night, his mother's particular seriousness. He had seen his father's picture in a newspaper. He had the 5-year-old's certain knowledge that something important had happened, and the 5-year-old's specific frustration at not being told what. A man said something unkind about Grandma. Bruce said, not simplified, exactly, just direct. What did he say? He implied that Grandma was frightening rather than wise, that her love for me was something to joke about. Brandon considered this with the gravity of someone to whom grandmothers are extremely real and important. Was he mean? Bruce thought about it. He was not trying to be mean, he said. That's what made it complicated. He was trying to be funny. Sometimes people cause harm without meaning to. That doesn't make the harm smaller. What did you do? I told him my mother deserves respect, Bruce said. And then I left. Brandon was quiet for a moment. Why didn't you stay and fight him? Because that would have been about my anger, Bruce said. What I did was about something larger than my anger. It was about what's true. My mother deserves respect. That's true whether I'm angry or not. I want to say what's true and then give that truth room to exist without surrounding it with noise. Brandon thought about this. Are you sad? He asked. No, Bruce said. And then, after a moment, I'm proud. Of what? That I knew what mattered more than staying in the chair. Brandon looked at his father with the clear, uncomplicated measuring look of children who haven't yet learned to pretend they're not assessing you. Me too, Brandon said. And that was the end of the conversation. Because Brandon had spotted a garden spider in the grass, and the conversation about dignity would have to wait for the spider to be properly examined. Bruce watched his son crouch down to look at the spider and felt something that did not have a name in English. Something that the Chinese language catches in the space between gratitude and sorrow, between fullness and loss. The feeling of a moment that is happening and already ending at the same time. He sat in the grass with his son and watched the spider. The letter from Hong Kong. The letter from his mother arrived 2 weeks after the incident. It was handwritten in a combination of English and Cantonese, which was how Grace Leho wrote to her son, not code switching, but both at once. The way her mind worked, the way she had always lived. The English portion said that she had read the newspaper account, that she had heard the 6 words quoted. The Cantonese portion said something harder to translate directly, but which carried, approximately, the following meaning. You did not do this for me. You did it because it was right. And because you knew the difference, you did not need my permission. She wrote that she was proud of him not because he had defended her, though she was grateful for that, but because he had understood that some things cannot be sat through, that the act of continuing to sit, of continuing to smile and perform through something that violates what you know to be true, is its own kind of violence, a violence you commit against your own knowing. I raised you to know what matters, she wrote. I am glad to learn you still do. She asked about Brandon. She mentioned the weather in Hong Kong. She closed a formal phrase that translated roughly as, go well. Bruce kept the letter in the desk where he wrote his notes on Jeet Kune Do. He kept it there for the rest of his life. The ripple that became a wave. For decades afterward, media studies programs would use a clip of the empty chair, the 30 seconds of live television after Bruce Lee's exit, when the stage held nothing but Dean Martin's fading grin and Johnny Carson's careful composure, as a teaching document. They called it the walk. They analyzed it for what it demonstrated about power and performance, about the difference between the courage that makes noise and the courage that simply acts. They analyzed it for what it meant in the context of 1970, of Asian American representation, of the specific cultural logic that said, you are welcome here as long as you smile through everything we do to you. They analyzed the 6 words for their structural properties. 6 words. Subject, verb, object. Nothing extra. Nothing decorative. The economy of it was itself a statement. The absolute refusal of elaboration, of justification, of the apologetic over-explanation that marginalized people learn to offer as proof that their grievance is real. My mother deserves respect. Not, I feel that your comments were inappropriate and perhaps you should consider. Not, I understand you meant no harm, but not the long form, the short form, the true form, subject, verb, object, then the walk. The question he was always asked. After Enter the Dragon, after the magazines and the television specials and the global cultural phenomenon that his name had become, journalists always eventually circled back to March 1970, to The Tonight Show, to the chair. The question was always some version of, do you regret walking off? Did it cost you opportunities? Bruce Lee's answer never varied. Not in 1971. Not in 1972. Not in the months before his death in July 1973, when he was 32 years old and at the exact apex of something that had not yet had time to become what it might have been? The answer was always, my mother deserved respect. 5 words now, not 6. He had dropped them somewhere along the way. Or perhaps a reporter had. The difference didn't matter. The weight was the same. He was not available for regret about that night. He had spent his life studying the concept of presence. The idea that the only moment that exists is the moment you're in, and that the only action worth taking is the action that reflects what you know to be true in the moment you're in it. In that moment, in Studio 6B at NBC in New York City, on a night in March 1970, he had known what was true. He had said it. He had left. That was the whole of it. What Dean Martin carried. Years later, after Bruce Lee had died at 32 and the whole world had absorbed the loss of what he'd been and what he might have become, Dean Martin gave an interview in which the reporter asked him about the Tonight Show incident. Dean was older. The easy charm was still there, but it sat differently now. Not on the surface, but underneath, earned rather than effortless. The charm of a man who had lived long enough to understand what he hadn't understood when he was younger. He was quiet for a moment. I was not thinking, he said finally. I was being what I was, a comedian, a performer, a man who had spent 30 years getting laughs without thinking hard enough about where the laugh was coming from or who it was landing on. He paused. That's not an excuse. It's just what it was. He said he had watched the tape of the incident multiple times. He said the thing that stayed with him was not the moment Bruce Lee stood up. It was a moment before it. The moment when Bruce had said, my mother is a very dignified woman, and Dean had heard it and not heard it at the same time, had heard it as the setup for the next joke, rather than as a man drawing a line. He told me, Dean said, he told me clearly, and I kept going. That's the thing I think about. He did not request absolution. He did not frame the regret as greater than what it was, or smaller than what it was. He simply reported it. He was right, Dean Martin said. His mother deserved respect. Every mother deserves respect. I was being careless with something that mattered to him. And when he told me it mattered, I was too busy being charming to listen. He was quiet again. I hope he knew, eventually, that I understood that. I never got the chance to tell him myself. The Legacy of the Empty Chair. March 1970. NBC Studios. New York City. The night that 11 million Americans watched a man stand up from a television chair, remove his microphone, and walk off a live set rather than sit through one more second of having his family mocked by someone too comfortable to think about what their comfort cost. The night that Bruce Lee, martial artist, philosopher, the son of a dignified woman who had taught him that honor was not the reputation you built with strangers, but the standard you kept when no one was watching, chose 6 words over 30 minutes of airtime. The night that an empty chair said more than a full one. There are moments in history that seem small while they are happening and reveal their size later, when you can see the whole shape of thing. The walk-off at Studio 6B was that kind of moment. It did not topple an industry. It did not immediately change every conversation in every casting room in Hollywood. It did not, by itself, fix anything that was broken. What it did was simpler and therefore more durable. It showed everyone watching, the 11 million in their living rooms, the woman in Oakland who'd been swallowing her pride for 19 years, the 14-year-old boy in San Francisco whose father tried to explain what the headline meant, the mother in Hong Kong reading an English-language newspaper at her kitchen table. It showed them what principle looks like in a body, not principle as abstraction, principle as motion, as the decision to stand, as the careful placement of a microphone on a chair, as a stride toward a door, measured and complete and belonging entirely to itself. Bruce Lee had spent his life teaching that the body is the instrument through which the self is known. He had spent his life arguing that martial arts was not about fighting. It was about the clear, undistracted awareness of what you are and what you believe and what, therefore, you cannot do. He demonstrated it that night without throwing a single punch. The most powerful thing he ever did in front of the camera was walk away from one. That is a lesson he left in that empty chair. Some things cost everything, and some things are worth everything they cost. His mother deserved respect, and he was the kind of man who knew the difference between knowing that and doing something about it, and who had decided, long before March of 1970, that there was no difference worth keeping. The empty chair in Studio 6B, March 1970. The night the most powerful thing Bruce Lee ever did was nothing violent at all.